I never expected a patch of dirt to change my life. There it was, bare, neglected, and completely ignored, right at the edge of one of the most pristine and notoriously uptight HOAs in the county. I first saw it while driving past on a Sunday afternoon, my curiosity piqued by its absurd emptiness. The manicured lawns of the neighborhood stopped abruptly, and beyond the last picket fence lay an empty lot, unclaimed, ungoverned, and, as I would soon discover, full of potential. At first glance, it seemed like nothing, but sometimes nothing is everything. I had been walking a tightrope of frustration for years, dealing with my neighbors' petty complaints and intrusive HOA rules that felt designed to suffocate rather than protect. And that's when it hit me. If I couldn't play by their rules, I'd create my own. This land, small, forgotten, just beyond the reach of their zoning patrols, was my loophole, my liberation, my weapon. But it wasn't just the land that drew me in. It was her, Karen. I had seen her before, strolling through the HOA streets like she owned every corner of it, chatting with other homeowners in that fake, saccharine tone that made teeth ache. She was beautiful in the way that immediately demanded attention, but more than that, she had a reputation that preceded her. Karen didn't just live in the neighborhood. She dominated it. She dictated what parties were acceptable, which flowers could be planted, and even how the color of mailboxes was morally aligned with her vision of suburban perfection. Karen's latest scheme, as I quickly learned, was audacious even by her standards. She had her eyes on the empty lot, my lot, though I didn't know it yet, and had already begun scheming how she would turn it into a pool mansion that would dwarf her already gaudy estate. I could hear the murmurs of HOA meetings echoing through the walls of my apartment, reports of her planning committee ideas floating like poisoned balloons through the neighborhood grapevine. They thought they had it all mapped out. Little did they know, the map didn't include me. I did my homework. Nights were spent scrolling through public records, researching property deeds, zoning laws, and any loopholes that might work in my favor. By the time I had finished, I knew two things. First, Karen had no legal claim to the land, and second, she was dangerously confident. That confidence, I realized, would be her undoing. It was early March when I made my move. The air still carried a crisp bite, the kind that made your lungs feel alive and your nose jittery. I parked my car in front of the lot, the wheels crunching against loose gravel, and stepped out. My heart thumped, a mix of exhilaration and fear. Who knew if this land would be more than a fantasy? Or if, once I touched it, it would turn into another of my failed ideas? But the moment I laid eyes on it again, I felt something electric, like the land itself was whispering, "Yours." The purchase was straightforward but exhilarating. I signed the deed, sealed the papers, and for the first time in years, felt a sense of power that wasn't borrowed from anyone else. I owned it, every inch of it. And for Karen, who had already been daydreaming about diving into her hypothetical pool, it was a devastating loss she couldn't have predicted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining her face when she found out, perfectly composed, yet utterly crushed. How would she react when the realization hit that her empire of control didn't extend to this patch of earth? More importantly, what would she do next? I knew Karen wasn't someone who accepted defeat gracefully. If I had bought the land, I had also unknowingly drawn her into a battle she would fight tooth and nail, and I had no intention of backing down. I asked myself, staring at the ceiling as the moonlight cut through my blinds, do I really want to go down this path, knowing that the revenge I'm plotting could spiral into something I might not be able to control? The answer, as obvious as the moon above, was yes. I didn't just want the land. I wanted the satisfaction of outmaneuvering Karen. I wanted to see her plans crumble like sandcastles under a ruthless tide. And I wanted everyone in the neighborhood, every snooty homeowner who had ever judged me, to watch as I transformed what they had dismissed into something spectacular. The following weeks were a blur. I kept my acquisition secret, quietly preparing for the eventual confrontation. Every time Karen passed the lot, her expression shifted slightly, a twitch of suspicion that I could feel like static electricity. I imagined her plotting, trying to find a legal reason to claim what was now mine. She was intelligent, meticulous, and persistent, but so was I. And then, one Friday afternoon, it happened. I was leaning against the edge of the lot, surveying the space with an almost artistic appreciation, when I saw her drive up, The neighborhood gossip had always warned me about her dramatic entrances, and sure enough, she stepped out of her SUV like a queen entering her court. She paused at the edge of the property, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of the freshly posted private property sign I had installed. She didn't say a word at first, just stared, and I could see it, the calculation behind her eyes, the silent, furious storm building like a tidal wave. "You can't. This isn't," she began, her voice a mix of outrage and disbelief. "I can," I said, calm but deliberate. "And it is." Her mouth opened again, but no words came out. I could practically hear the gears turning, scheming, spinning, how she might try to turn this setback into a comeback. But at that moment, I realized something crucial. Karen had underestimated me. She thought she had already won before the battle even started. And that arrogance? That would be her greatest mistake. I tilted my head slightly, letting the silence stretch just long enough for it to sting. "So," I said, with a smile that was both reassuring and terrifying, "what are you going to do about it?" Her glare was sharp enough to cut glass. The air between us seemed to crackle with tension, and I felt a thrill that ran deeper than anything I had experienced in years. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about power, pride, and proving who really held control. I knew in that moment that this was only the beginning, and that the war between us would be long, clever, and merciless. As I watched her storm back to her car, fists clenched, I whispered to myself, almost reverently, "Let the games begin." The morning after our first confrontation, the neighborhood felt different. I could sense Karen's eyes burning into my back from a distance, even when she wasn't there. There were whispers in the HOA group chat, veiled hints and questions from neighbors who clearly sensed something was happening. They didn't know the half of it. The land, quiet and unassuming, had become a chessboard, and I was determined to play my moves better than anyone had anticipated. Karen was relentless. By the end of the week, she had already initiated a flurry of calls to lawyers, contractors, and even the local zoning board, trying desperately to find a legal loophole to reclaim the lot. I watched from a distance as her efforts became frantic, almost comical in their futility. She was like a queen trapped in a glass tower, pounding on the walls, but unable to reach the outside world where the real power resided. It was exhilarating. Every failed call she made, every frustrated glance she shot in my direction, made me feel more alive than I had in years. But I knew better than to underestimate her. Karen wasn't just persistent. She was intelligent, cunning, and capable of plotting strategies that could turn the tide in an instant. If I wanted victory, I had to anticipate her every move. So I began my own preparations. I met with architects and builders in secret, sketching out designs that were audacious, almost absurd in their scale. A pool mansion? Sure, but not just a mansion. It would be a fortress of creativity, a monument to what she had tried to claim and failed. A house that would make the neighborhood gasp and, more importantly, make Karen control crumble like brittle plaster. At night, I wandered the lot, feeling the cold earth beneath my feet. I imagined walls rising, windows framing perfect views of the sunset, a pool glimmering like liquid glass. But more than that, I imagined Karen's reaction, the jealousy, the rage, the humbling realization that her empire of influence had limits. The thought sent a thrill through me, sharper and sweeter than any revenge fantasy I had ever entertained. Karen didn't wait passively. She escalated. The following Monday, she appeared at my apartment, uninvited, bearing an aura of righteous indignation. I opened the door to find her standing there, arms crossed, perfectly coiffed hair slightly fluttering from the breeze of the air conditioner. "This has gone far enough," she said, her voice sharp, clipped, and venomous. "You can't just take what's mine." I laughed, genuinely amused. "You really think it's yours? Because according to the deed, it's mine. Every inch." She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a dangerous whisper. "I will not be humiliated. You don't know who you're dealing with." And that's when I realized Karen's pride was her Achilles heel. She thrived on perception, on control, on the illusion that everyone around her bowed to her influence. Strip that away, and the fortress of her ego begins to crumble. I had done more than buy land. I had started dismantling her narrative. The following days were a delicate dance of strategy and observation. I kept meticulous records of her activities, noting when she visited contractors, attended HOA meetings, and even her trips to the local garden center to choose landscaping that, in her mind, would somehow dominate my empty lot. I began planting subtle misinformation, letting her hear rumors of extravagant designs I had planned, floating ideas of infinity pools, rooftop gardens, and hidden tunnels, each one designed to inflate her paranoia and fuel her obsession with outmaneuvering me. And she fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. Every rumor made her more frantic. She began questioning her own contractors, second-guessing her HOA allies, and even publicly questioning her own taste in front of neighbors who, secretly, were enjoying the spectacle. But the real challenge came unexpectedly. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the rolling hills, I noticed a group of men surveying the property. Outsiders, unfamiliar faces. Karen had hired someone. My heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. She was escalating. She was sending in professionals to intimidate, to perhaps find a way to sabotage the lot before construction began. I didn't panic. Instead, I smiled. Let her come. The stage was set, the actors in place, and I had the advantage of knowledge. I approached them cautiously, introducing myself as a property owner. Their surprise was evident, and before long, it became clear they weren't there to negotiate, but to intimidate. I handled them with calm authority, making it clear that any interference would be met with legal action. They left, muttering under their breath, and I knew I had just won another round. Meanwhile, the gossip in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch. Karen's frustration was becoming public knowledge, her once polished persona cracking under the pressure. People whispered about her obsession with the lot, the way she would drive past repeatedly, checking if anything had changed. Some even speculated whether she had lost her mind entirely. And I, from my secret vantage point, relished the irony. The woman who prided herself on control had become a character in a drama she couldn't script. Despite the satisfaction, I knew I couldn't underestimate her. Karen was clever, and clever people get desperate. The next phase of my plan required patience, precision, and a touch of psychological warfare. I started hosting casual meetings with my builders in plain sight, letting her see glimpses of the plans, but never the full picture. I planted fake design sketches near the edge of the property, knowing she had spies in every HOA meeting, knowing she would find them and obsess over the details. One evening, as I sipped my coffee on the balcony, I saw her again, lingering at the property line. Her eyes darted to the sketches I had placed deliberately, her jaw tightening with frustration. I could practically hear the mental wheel spinning. How big? How luxurious? How daring? I knew she was imagining her own loss, each idea I planted like a seed of her humiliation. I asked myself then, almost rhetorically, as I watched her storm back to her car, how far will she go? And how far am I willing to push her before it becomes dangerous? The answer was both terrifying and exhilarating. I wasn't just playing for property. I was playing for dominance, for satisfaction, for the sweet thrill of watching someone so confident brought to their knees. By the end of the week, Karen had crossed an unspoken line. She began directly confronting contractors, threatening lawsuits, and making veiled threats about HOA intervention. But she still didn't realize one crucial fact. The land was legally mine. Every attempt she made to reclaim it was doomed before it started. I could feel her desperation mounting with each passing day. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. She was the one reacting, the one overthinking, the one spiraling. And I was calm, collected, and preparing the next move in a game she didn't even know she was losing. Late one night, I sat under the stars on the empty lot, imagining the future mansion rising from the earth. The pool glimmered in my mind like a beacon of triumph. But more than the physical structure, I envisioned the look on Karen's face when she finally understood that her control, her influence, and her carefully constructed reputation had no power over what I had now claimed. And then, quietly, almost like a whisper in the wind, I made a vow. This isn't just about land anymore. This is about showing her, and everyone who ever doubted me, that you don't mess with me. Not ever. The storm was brewing, and neither of us knew exactly how violent it would become. But one thing was certain. The battle lines were drawn, and the war between me and Karen had only just begun. The first day we broke ground on the lot felt like stepping into a battlefield. My heart raced as the excavators dug into the earth, carving out beginnings of what would soon be more than just a house. It would be a monument, a statement, a triumph over Karen and everything she represented. The air smelled of freshly toned soil, metal, and ambition. Every rumble of the machinery sounded like a drumbeat in a war that had been simmering for weeks. Karen, predictably, appeared before dawn. I saw her from my car as I drove onto the property, her figure silhouetted against the rising sun. She was pacing, muttering to herself, glaring at the machines like they had personally insulted her. She had already contacted every contractor in the county, trying to convince them to abandon my project, to sabotage it even. Some had laughed and refused. Others had quietly walked away, citing scheduling conflicts. But despite her fury and determination, the work had begun. My victory wasn't just legal. It was tangible, visible, and unstoppable. I stepped out of the car and watched as the first piles of dirt were moved. The workers knew the stakes, and I could feel their energy. This wasn't just a job. It was a mission. Every scoop of soil, every nail hammered, every blueprint unfolded on the lot was a step toward humiliating Karen, without her realizing just how thoroughly she was losing. She approached, her designer heels crunching over gravel, perfectly out of place amid the chaos. Her eyes were sharp, scanning, calculating, plotting. "You know," she said, voice low but seething, "you're going to regret this." I smiled, calm and deliberate. "I don't think I will." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned to leave, but not before throwing a final, venomous glance at me. I knew that glance. It was a look of someone who was already imagining their next move, someone who thought that control could be reclaimed with sheer willpower. Little did she know, she had walked straight into the trap I had been meticulously setting. The weeks that followed were a blur of construction, strategy, and subtle sabotage. I had planned everything with precision, hiring builders who not only excelled at their craft but understood the stakes. Every wall, every window, every curve of the pool was designed to provoke, and, more importantly, to make Karen's envy palpable. She escalated in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. One morning, a note appeared on my construction site sign. "You think you can outmaneuver me? Think again. Karen." It was unsigned, but the handwriting screamed entitlement and fury. The workers laughed it off, but I felt a thrill run through me. She was reacting exactly as I had hoped, obsessed, unhinged, and dangerously predictable. Then came the first attempt at direct interference. Late one night, I caught a shadow lurking near the lot. Someone had tried to tamper with the equipment, leaving subtle but noticeable marks that could have caused delays. I didn't panic. Instead, I documented everything. Every footprint, every mark, every suspicious movement became evidence. Karen may have thought she was clever, but every move she made was only strengthening my position. I decided it was time to push the psychological advantage even further. I began leaving construction progress visible from the street, even before the exterior walls were up. I planted strategically placed signs and banners hinting at extravagant features: a pool with waterfalls, a rooftop terrace, a garden maze. I made sure she saw them. Every rumor, every image, every whispered description of the mansion was crafted to unsettle her. And it worked. Karen began visiting more frequently, pacing the edges of the property, occasionally confronting workers with increasingly absurd demands. "Make sure the pool is deeper than mine," she snapped one afternoon. "And the windows, bigger than mine." Her obsession was turning into desperation, and I felt an almost dark satisfaction watching her spiral. The neighborhood noticed, of course. Soon, whispers of a feud between me and Karen spread like wildfire. People speculated about the empty lot, about the mansion taking shape, about the drama behind closed doors of the HOA. Some sided with Karen, seeing her as a defender of neighborhood prestige. Others quietly rooted for me, secretly thrilled to see the so-called queen of the block flustered and powerless. It was intoxicating. Power, it seemed, wasn't about wealth or title. It was about control, and Karen had lost it. Then came the confrontation that would define the next stage of our battle. One hot, sticky afternoon, Karen appeared with her lawyers, contractors in tow, and cameras flashing like we were filming some suburban soap opera. She tried to intimidate, to argue, to coerce. Every word was precise, calculated to create doubt in the minds of my builders, to sow panic and hesitation. But I was ready. I had every document, every deed, every legal clause prepared. I met her accusations with calm certainty, never raising my voice, never showing fear. "The property is mine," I said firmly. "All construction is fully legal, fully approved, and will continue uninterrupted." Her face twisted with rage. I could see the desperation building. "This isn't over," she spat, storming off with her entourage. "You will pay for this." I watched her leave, feeling the exhilarating mixture of triumph and anticipation. Every threat, every attempt at intimidation only confirmed my victory. Karen's pride would never allow her to back down, but neither would my determination falter. As night fell, I walked the lot alone, listening to the wind rustling through the half-dug earth and the skeletal beginnings of walls rising around me. This was more than revenge. It was artistry, strategy, and power combined. And Karen, brilliant and ruthless as she was, had walked right into the trap I had designed. I paused at the edge of the future pool, imagining water cascading over its edges, sunlight reflecting off the tiles, and the inevitable look of shock and fury on Karen's face when she saw it completed. Every day, every detail, every ounce of energy I poured into this project was a step closer to humiliation and victory. The question that lingered in my mind, though, was dangerous. How far would Karen go? Her obsession had already led her to harassment, threats, and interference. Would she escalate further, risking legal consequences or worse? Or had she underestimated me completely, believing that fear and intimidation could override the law, the plans, and the inevitable? Either way, I was ready. I had the upper hand, the advantage of planning, patience, and precision. And as I stood there, surveying the lot that was slowly transforming into a fortress of triumph, I knew one thing for certain. Karen's world would never be the same. This wasn't just a mansion, it was a statement, a warning, and a promise that revenge, when executed perfectly, was sweeter than any victory that came without struggle. The ground had been broken, the battle lines drawn, and the war had officially begun. The first hints of real sabotage hit like a thunderclap. I was overseeing the construction one Friday morning when one of my workers called out, eyes wide with alarm. "Someone's been here," he said, pointing toward the freshly dug foundation. I felt a sharp jolt of adrenaline as I examined the site. Tools had been moved. A few supply crates were slightly ajar. Nothing major, but enough to send a clear message. Karen wasn't playing anymore. Her escalation had crossed from mere threats to physical interference. I didn't panic. Instead, I felt the rush of the hunt, the thrill of a battle now stretching beyond paperwork and legal threats into something more primal. She was trying to unsettle me, to rattle my team, to make us doubt our security, and I intended to turn her own desperation against her. I immediately increased security, installing cameras, motion sensors, and strategically placed floodlights that would illuminate the lot at night. But I did more than just protect the site. I used the sabotage as an opportunity to send a message. I left subtle signs of monitoring everywhere, making it clear that anyone trying to interfere would be caught in the act. I wanted Karen to see that her moves were transparent, that I was always one step ahead. It wasn't long before her attempts escalated further. One night, a delivery truck arrived early, supposedly bringing supplies, but in reality, it had been tampered with to delay our progress. The driver claimed ignorance, but the pattern was unmistakable. Karen had recruited outside help, professionals willing to bend the rules for her cause. I smiled quietly, knowing exactly how to turn this against her. Instead of confronting her immediately, I let it play out, documenting everything meticulously. Each act of sabotage became evidence, each misstep a trap, each attempt at intimidation a public record. By the time Karen realized I wasn't flinching, she would already be caught in a web of her own making. But psychological warfare wasn't enough. I decided to strike where it would hurt her most, her pride. I began sending carefully curated updates of our progress to the neighborhood, ensuring that Karen's friends and allies witnessed the transformation without knowing the full extent of plans. Images of scaffolding, glimpses of the pool's intricate layout, and even casual mentions of extravagant features like a rooftop garden or hidden wine cellar were strategically leaked. Every rumor, every image, every hint was designed to make her anxiety spike. And it worked beautifully. I could see her walking past the lot, shoulders tense, lips pressed into a tight line, eyes darting to every corner. She was obsessed, checking the construction multiple times a day, trying to predict what would come next. And yet, she couldn't stop it. The mansion was rising, unstoppable and audacious. Then came the most daring move of all. One evening, I noticed her SUV parked near the lot again, the engine idling as if she were planning something. I watched silently from the shadows, heart racing with anticipation. She had crossed into reckless territory, attempting to interfere directly. This time, I was ready. As she approached, a team of private security, hired weeks in advance for just this eventuality, stepped from the shadows, calmly but firmly blocking her path. "You need to leave," one of them said. "Trespassing is a serious offense." Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. "You can't do this. I have every right." "Not here," I interrupted, stepping out from behind a wall of scaffolding. "This is private property. The land, the construction, everything is fully legal. You are trespassing." The look on her face was a mix of disbelief and fury. She had always believed her influence could bend reality, that her power could override rules, laws, or common sense. And yet, here she was, blocked, powerless, and humiliated. But Karen didn't back down. She was relentless, always calculating, always planning the next move. I knew it was only a matter of time before she tried something even more drastic: legal threats, public complaints, or even more dangerous interference. I needed to escalate too, not just offend, but control the narrative entirely. I began hosting small events on the lot under the guise of planning meetings, inviting local contractors, architects, and even select neighbors to observe. Each event was designed to publicly showcase our progress while simultaneously reminding Karen, and anyone else watching, that this project was untouchable. I leaked casual photos of the designs, letting them circulate on neighborhood forums, ensuring that whispers of envy, disbelief, and curiosity reached her ears daily. Karen's obsession grew. She became a fixture at the lot, pacing along the edges, muttering, watching, analyzing. Every interaction she had with contractors or neighbors was punctuated by frustration and disbelief. She had underestimated me, underestimated the law, and underestimated my patience. And in her obsession, she revealed her vulnerabilities, her arrogance, her impatience, her need to control every detail. One night, as I reviewed footage from the security cameras, I noticed something troubling. A shadow had been moving along the perimeter, outside the sensor's range. It was Karen, or someone acting on her behalf. She was still trying, still desperate, still blind to the fact that every move she made was being watched and recorded. The realization was intoxicating. I had turned her into a predictable force, a pawn in my carefully designed game. That's when I made a plan, an offensive maneuver. If she wanted to play dirty, I would give her a taste of her own medicine. I began leaving subtle hints that I was aware of every move she made, footprint preserved in date, fake logs of surveillance indicating her presence, and small, staged disruptions that made her believe I could predict her every action. The tension was palpable. She started second-guessing herself, questioning allies, and even hesitating in conversations. It became clear that the war was no longer about land. It was about dominance, control, and psychological supremacy. Karen had always relied on intimidation, manipulation, and a network of influence to maintain power. But now, with the mansion rising and her efforts failing spectacularly, the power dynamic had flipped completely. As I stood on the lot one evening, watching the foundation of the mansion take shape beneath the setting sun, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Every obstacle, every sabotage attempt, every threat she had thrown at me had been anticipated, countered, and neutralized. She was furious, obsessed, and increasingly desperate, but I was calm, deliberate, and in complete control. And I knew, deep down, that the most satisfying part of revenge wasn't just winning. It was watching someone like Karen unravel, powerless to stop the inevitable. The mansion wasn't just a house. It was a weapon, a statement, a trophy, and a message all at once. The next morning, I watched as Karen appeared again at the edge of the lot. She froze for a moment, staring at the work in progress, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. I could almost hear the questions forming in her mind. How is this possible? How am I losing? How did I not see this coming? I smiled quietly to myself, knowing that each day, each detail, each calculated move was pushing her closer to the breaking point. She didn't just want the land. She wanted control, dominance, and the humiliation of seeing me fail. But as long as I stayed patient, as long as I stayed vigilant, her own obsession would be her undoing. The war had escalated, the stakes had grown, and the mansion was no longer just a building. It was a battlefield. And I, for the first time in years, felt the intoxicating thrill of having the upper hand. Karen had no idea how badly she was losing. The mansion was nearly complete. The foundation had risen into walls of gleaming stone and glass, and the pool shimmered under the sun like liquid crystal. Every day, the transformation of the lot reminded me why I had embarked on this path, not just for revenge, but for the sheer satisfaction of reclaiming control from someone who had spent years trying to dominate my life. Karen, predictably, could not accept it. She had escalated from threats to interference, and now she had begun attempting public attacks. Rumors circulated through the neighborhood HOA, claiming I had violated obscure building codes, suggesting that the construction would destabilize surrounding properties, that it was inappropriate and dangerous. Her face was familiar presence in meetings, veins taut with rage, eyes darting to me every time I spoke. I ignored her theatrics, maintaining my calm. I had documented every legal approval, every contractor's license, every safety inspection. I wasn't just prepared for her attacks. I was armed with evidence that would make her look foolish to anyone watching. But she didn't care about facts or logic. She thrived on fear, influence, and the illusion of control. And that illusion had begun to crack. One afternoon, Karen went too far. I arrived at the site to find one of our supply trucks overturned at the edge of the lot. The driver was shaken but unharmed, and the damage to materials was minimal. It was obvious sabotage. Whoever had done this was either inexperienced or reckless, or desperate. And desperation was Karen's signature. Instead of panicking, I smiled. Let her take the bait. I called the police, filed a report, and made sure the news spread subtly through the neighborhood. A minor incident, nothing serious, fully under control. The narrative shifted immediately. Her attempts at intimidation became public evidence of her obsession and recklessness. She had begun to lose the support of neighbors who previously admired her for keeping the community in check. But the real turning point came when I decided to strike preemptively. I had noticed her constant surveillance and obsessive monitoring. Every time she tried to manipulate contractors, spread rumors, or plan interference, I had anticipated it. Now it was time to turn the tables completely. I orchestrated a series of subtle traps designed to make her efforts backfire. False deadlines, staged conversations overheard by neighbors, and strategic leaks about property inspections created the perfect storm. She would intervene, believing she could stop us, only to inadvertently expose herself as irrational and unstable. The first trap came on a warm Friday evening. Karen arrived at the lot, flustered and shouting at a contractor she had approached, claiming urgent violations. I calmly stepped in, showing contractor detailed documentation proving compliance with every code, every regulation, every municipal requirement. The contractor, visibly uncomfortable, tried to explain, but Karen's face twisted with frustration. For the first time in years, I saw real doubt in her eyes. She realized she had miscalculated. The next day, I hosted a casual inspection walkthrough, inviting neighbors to observe the progress. Karen, unaware of the event, appeared to confront me, but as she approached, cameras captured her outburst, angry, loud, irrational. Neighbors whispered, exchanged glances, and a few even stepped closer to see the site, curious. The psychological shift was palpable. Karen's authority was slipping while my credibility and poise were strengthening. Then came her most desperate move. Late one night, a figure tried to tamper with the pool installation equipment, messing with plumbing lines, attempting to disrupt the filtration system. Security caught the intruder in the act. Evidence pointed directly to someone Karen had contracted privately. I documented everything meticulously, ensuring that when the time came, she could not deny involvement. I knew the time for subtlety had ended. The mansion, now nearly tangible, needed a symbolic victory, something public, undeniable, and humiliating. I orchestrated a pre-completion reveal, inviting selected neighbors and media to view the property. Word spread quickly, and Karen could do nothing to stop it. She tried, frantically, to delay the event with complaints and legal threats, but every attempt was preemptively countered. The reveal day arrived. The mansion gleamed in the afternoon sun, the pool reflecting light across the pristine walls. Guests arrived, murmuring in awe at the audacity and beauty of the design. I watched Karen from a distance, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. She approached, clearly planning some dramatic confrontation, only to be met with polite indifference from the crowd. Every whispered accusation she attempted was drowned out by admiration for the project. She confronted me at last, near the pool, her voice trembling with rage. You can't do this. I'll make sure. I've already done it, I interrupted calmly, letting the words land. The land is mine. The construction is legal. And everything you've tried has only exposed your obsession. Her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, I saw doubt, fear, and the realization that she had lost control. Her power, built over years of manipulation, was crumbling. And the worst part, for her, was that it was public. Neighbors had seen the truth, witnessed her failures, observed her unraveling. I felt an almost dizzying satisfaction. This wasn't just victory, it was a complete reversal. Karen, who had thrived on control, influence, and fear, was powerless against the strategy, patience, and foresight I had deployed. Every threat she had made, every sabotage attempt, every whisper in the HOA corridors had been anticipated and neutralized. As the crowd marveled at the mansion, I took a moment to step back, feeling the full weight of my triumph. Every inch of the lot, every stone of the walls, every ripple in the pool was a testament to persistence, cunning, and strategy. Karen had tried to take what was mine, but in the end, she had only exposed her obsession and fragility. She lingered at the edge of the crowd, watching, muttering under her breath. I knew she was already plotting the next move, because someone like her could never accept defeat. But I had momentum, the upper hand, and a complete record of every action she had taken. The stage was set, the players clear, and the outcome increasingly inevitable. That night, as the sun set and the mansion shimmered in the fading light, I couldn't help but feel a surge of exhilaration. The revenge, painstakingly plotted over weeks of observation, sabotage, and psychological games, had reached its crescendo. And yet, even in victory, one question lingered like a shadow. What will she do next? Because Karen was relentless, ruthless, obsessed. And while I had won the battle, the war of wills was far from over. The morning of the mansion's grand unveiling arrived, crisp and bright. The air smelled of fresh paint, polished stone, and the faint scent of chlorine from pool. I stood on the balcony overlooking the sweeping property, watching as the final touches were added. The fountain in the garden, the marble pathway leading to the entrance, the strategically placed, lighting that made the mansion sparkle like a jewel. Every detail was deliberate, designed to intimidate and leave a permanent mark on the neighborhood and on Karen. I knew she would be watching. Karen had become a fixture in my life over the past weeks, obsessed and unpredictable. I had anticipated every move, counted every threat, and yet, in my heart, I knew that a final act could be reckless and dangerous. I had prepared for it. The police had been alerted to potential trespassing. The security team was on high alert, and I had arranged for every legal document to be ready in case she tried to challenge the property publicly. And she did. At precisely 10 o'clock, Karen appeared at the edge of the driveway, her designer heels clicking sharply against the stone. She was flanked by a small entourage of neighbors who seemed equally curious and apprehensive. Her face was pale, tight with fury, her eyes darting to the mansion as if she could somehow make it disappear by sheer will. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice echoing across the property. "This is mine. You have no right." I stepped forward, calm and deliberate. "The land is legally mine, every inch of it. The construction is fully permitted. Everything you've tried has failed." Her lips quivered as she took a step closer, fury radiating like heat. "I will ruin you. You will regret." The words caught in her throat as the neighbors around her began murmuring, some clearly impressed with the mansion, others exchanging subtle smirks at the absurdity of her outburst. I had planned this moment with precision, The mansion completed, the neighborhood watching, and Karen exposed as irrational and obsessed. She lunged forward, nearly losing her composure entirely, but I didn't flinch. Security quietly stepped in, guiding her away from the property while I allowed her fury to play out. Every shout, every accusation, every wild gesture only confirmed what I had known all along. Karen's power had always been built on perception, and perception had turned against her. With her contained and the neighborhood bearing witness, I finally allowed myself to step into the mansion fully. Walking through the rooms, I marveled at the fruits of weeks of labor, strategy, and patience. The infinity pool stretched perfectly into the horizon, the marble floors gleamed under natural light, and the interior design was audacious yet elegant. Every corner was a statement, a declaration of victory, control, and foresight. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the mansion was alive with neighbors touring the property, whispers of admiration filling the air. Karen remained a distant figure, isolated and simmering with frustration. She had tried everything: threats, intimidation, sabotage, but every move had been anticipated, countered, and turned back on her. I took a quiet moment by the pool, the water reflecting the fiery hues of sunset. I couldn't help but reflect on the journey. Revenge wasn't just about punishing her. It was about reclaiming agency, asserting control, and proving that meticulous planning, patience, and strategy could triumph over arrogance and obsession. And then it hit me. The satisfaction wasn't just in the mansion itself or the humiliation I had orchestrated. It was in the complete reversal of power. Karen, once untouchable in her social dominance, was now powerless. Her influence had crumbled, her reputation subtly eroded by her own obsession, and the lot that had seemed trivial to her now stood as an unassailable testament to my victory. Weeks later, the HOA meeting continued, but Karen no longer dominated them. She was quieter, her authority fractured, her obsession redirected inward in frustration. I continued to expand the mansion, adding features and personal touches that made it unmistakably mine, a fortress, a palace, and a monument to patience and cunning. From the poolside, I often watched the neighborhood, sensing the subtle shift in perception. Neighbors who once admired her for control now whispered about her obsession and irrationality. And every time I walked through the halls of the mansion, I felt a deep, resonant satisfaction. I had turned her aggression into my advantage, her obsession into a tool, and her arrogance into proof of my ultimate triumph. In the quiet moments, alone in the mansion, I allowed myself a wry smile. Revenge, when executed perfectly, was sweeter than any other victory. It wasn't about destruction. It was about precision, patience, and timing. Karen had underestimated me at every turn, believing that her social influence and personal vendettas could overpower legal rights and meticulous planning. She had been wrong. And so, as the sun set behind the mansion, painting the pool in shades of molten gold, I felt a final sense of closure. The land, once empty and contested, was now mine. The mansion, once a fantasy and now a reality, stood as a symbol of triumph. And Karen had finally met the limits of her obsession. Victory was complete. The revenge was exacted. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to exhale, knowing the battle was over, and that the battlefield itself had been my masterpiece. The mansion wasn't just a home. It was a statement, a warning, and a monument to the fact that sometimes patience, strategy, and a relentless pursuit of justice or revenge could turn even the most arrogant adversary into a powerless spectator. Karen had tried to take what was mine. I had turned it into something far greater. And in the end, the land, the mansion, and the victory were all mine, utterly and completely.